Hello, I am Mr. Vikramaditya Nayak, the hospital chaplain. I would like to introduce Dr. Sam Gnanraj to all of us. Dr. Sam Gnanraj is coming to us from Coimbatore, Tamil Nadu. He has finished his studies in Adventist schools. Thereafter, he joined CMC Vellore for MBBS studies. After the completion of his MBBS studies from CMC Vellore, he joined Aijwal Adventist Hospital for 1 year. Thereafter, he moved to Pune Adventist Hospital for 1 more year. In his third year of his medical service, he joined Ottapalam Adventist Hospital in Kerala. At this time, he has gone back to CMC Vellore again to join for the master degree. Now he is studying pulmonary medicine, and we are so glad that he could join us as our guest speaker to present on the very important topic called thyroid. At this moment, I would like to hand over this time to Dr. Sam. Dr. Sam.
Hi, good morning everyone. This is Sam here and I'm presenting to you about the thyroid gland. A thyroid is a small gland present in our body. It is located in front of the neck, just in front of the windpipe. The trachea is the windpipe and this is a thyroid gland. As you can see, it's a butterfly shaped gland. Now when you talk about a gland, it secretes some substance which acts on some part of the body to produce some effects. Now there are two types of glands in the body. One type is called the exocrine gland. The other one is the endocrine gland. Now what is an exocrine gland? As you can see, this is the pancreas. Pancreas is a very classical example for the exocrine gland. As you can see, the gland has a collecting system here. This duct collects all the substance secreted, all the enzymes secreted by the pancreas, and it conducts it into the small intestine. This part is the duodenum. So the pancreas, the collecting system of the pancreas, collects all the digestive enzymes and empties it straight into the small intestine, where it mixes with the food and helps in digestion. Now this is what an exocrine gland does. Exocrine gland produces the substance, and then it also has a tube system which takes the substance to the desired location, and the substance that is produced by the exocrine gland acts very locally and produces the effects that we want. Now in contrast to it, when you take an endocrine gland, one example of endocrine gland is the pituitary gland. It's the master endocrine gland in the body. It is located in the brain, a very small organ in the brain, but this secretes hormones directly into the blood. So this is the blood vessel, and this gland, pituitary gland, secretes hormones directly into the blood vessel, which gets carried by the blood into the entire human body. Now wherever this hormone goes, it acts on all the organs that it's supposed to act on. Now that's what an endocrine gland does. So an endocrine gland secretes the substance that it produces, which is called hormone, directly into the bloodstream, and it has a system-wide effect. While an exocrine gland, it collects all the enzymes, the substances that it needs to produce, and it puts it directly into that location where the effects need to be seen. For one example of an endocrine gland, which produces a hormone called leptin. Now this hormone leptin is produced by all the fat cells in our body, and this hormone is directly secreted into the bloodstream, and as you can see, it affects so many organs. In case of the pancreas, it affects only the food particles which are there inside the small intestine because of the way it is secreted. Exocrine glands work that way, but endocrine gland, the hormones that is secreted go into the blood vessel, and as you can see, this leptin acts on the thyroid gland, it acts on the pancreas, it acts on the heart, it acts on the bone, it acts on the uterus, it acts on the brain, it acts on the immune cells, and it also acts on the blood vessels. So this is a classic example of an endocrine hormone which acts on a system-wide basis on all the organs present in the body. Now, thyroid is also an endocrine gland, which means that it produces some hormone, and this hormone has effects on organs which are present all over the body. Now, what are the hormones that thyroid gland secretes? These are two main hormones called T3 and T4, and there's one more called calcitonin. So T3 and T4 have almost the same effects. Um, is almost very similar in structure, both of these hormones, but one of them, the T3 hormone, is much more potent, much more stronger acting than the T4 hormone, and this hormone and both of them have almost the same effect. Now if you look at this picture, there is this hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is a structure located in the brain, and at the tip of the hypothalamus there is a small extension, and that's called the pituitary gland. I talked about this gland just earlier. Pituitary gland is the master endocrine gland in the body because it secretes different hormones that controls all the different glands in the body. So as you can see, it secretes a hormone. The pituitary gland secretes a hormone called the TSH. This is called the thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone, and this hormone goes and acts on the thyroid gland, and this is the hormone which makes the thyroid gland secrete T3, T4, and calcitonin. But how is this TSH produced? It is produced because there is another hormone called the thyrotropin releasing hormone, which is secreted by the hypothalamus, which acts locally on pituitary and helps to release the TSH into the bloodstream, which then acts on thyroid. So this is how thyroid hormone system, the secretion system, works. If you yeah. So if you look at what the thyroid hormone does, okay, it has very widespread effect. One of the very significant glands in the body, and the effects it produces are very classical and very pronounced. It acts on the heart, it acts on the digestive system, it acts on the brain development, it acts on the bone, it acts on the muscles, it, it, it acts on it increases your basal metabolic rate. And the hormone calcitonin, which is produced by a different group of cells in the same thyroid gland, it acts on the bones, it acts on the kidneys, and it also influences another hormone called the parathyroid hormone production. Now, there's something we need to know before we go deeper into the thyroid gland, and it's called the negative feedback loop. So I'll give you a short example here. This is a negative feedback loop. What it does? So basically, say this is a normal person. This is a normal person. He's happy, and suddenly, say the weather becomes outside becomes very cold, or the AC temperature is very less, and the body temperature decreases. Okay, so this person starts shivering because the body temperature decreases. When that happens, immediately the body tries to bring itself back into homeostasis, back into normal temperature, and it starts heating process. Now, heating process is what we perceive as shivering. Shivering is when all your muscles in the body contract so much so that, yeah, uh, all the muscles in your body contract so much that it spends a lot of calories, and thereby it produces so much heat and brings the body back into the normal temperature. So once the temperature of the body becomes normal, once it increases and becomes normal, the the shivering stops. Do you get it? So once the temperature increases and becomes normal, the shivering stops. The trigger for shivering is a decrease in body temperature, but shivering itself will will restore the normal body temperature, and thereby it will prevent further shivering. Now this is what we call as a negative feedback loop. In contrast, say the same way you can extrapolate it into increase in body temperature also. But there is another type of loop in the body. It's called the positive feedback loop. Now this happens when say example, there are very few instances of positive feedback loop compared to negative feedback loop in the body. Negative feedback loop is much more common in our body. Now what is a positive feedback loop? It is something where an action triggers the same action more, same action more, same action more, and the cycle continues more and more and more until it's become so explosive and the event that is desired happens very fast. For example, when when the mother is pregnant, okay, and the baby is in the uterus, at the time of labor and delivery, the baby has to come out of the human body. Now this is a very crucial time when the uterus when the uterus starts stretching. Okay, the stretch receptors are activated in the uterus, and this positively gives feedback to the brain for release of a hormone called oxytocin. This is a very important hormone. Now this hormone, when it's released into the blood, it goes to the uterus, the uterine muscles, and it contracts the uterus. It makes the uterus contract. Now what happens is, when this hormone oxytocin is produced, this has a positive feedback loop on itself. Okay, and again, what I mean by this is, oxytocin, if it's produced in small amount, can make itself produce in more amount, in more amount, in more amount. So for example, this oxytocin, what it does, it causes the uterine muscles to contract, and when that happens, what we really want is all the muscles to contract at the same time and to somehow push the fetus out at the right time. If the delivery is prolonged or takes more time than what it should take, the baby may develop hypoxia, may develop permanent brain injury. So we want the the process to be as fast as possible, and so this special mechanism God has devised. So this oxytocin, which helps in the contraction of the uterus, when it's produced and it goes back into the brain, this hormone acts on the brain, on the pituitary gland, and makes the pituitary gland secrete more, and these more oxytocin molecules, they in turn act on the pituitary gland and make it secrete even more oxytocin, even more oxytocin. So there is an explosive secretion of oxytocin. So much is secreted, and all of this acts in unison on the uterus and contracts the uterus and makes the baby delivery faster. Now negative feedback loop is opposite. What happens is, the hormone which is produced, okay, I'll give the example in thyroid gland. So here is again the hypothalamus, here is the pituitary gland, and it's the anterior pituitary which secretes the TSH hormone. This TSH hormone acts on the thyroid gland. This is the TSH hormone acts on the thyroid gland, which produces T3 and T4. Now these are the hormones, the final hormones that we require the thyroid gland to produce. Now when T3 and T4 are there in the blood in sufficient amount, this comes back and acts on the pituitary and the hypothalamus. Okay, and is the body's way of telling, we have enough T3 and T4, we don't need any more, so you can stop secretion of TSH and TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone and the thyroid stimulating hormone. So the body will understand the signal and it will stop secreting, and the levels of TSH, the levels of TRH in the body will go down, and this will in turn cause, when TSH goes down, what will happen? It will stop acting on the thyroid gland, and less amount of T3 and T4 are produced, less amount, and when the levels are decreasing, again there is a feedback which is going to the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus, which says the levels of T3 and T4 are decreasing, we need more T3 and T4. So when the body conveys this signal, body secretes, the hypothalamus and the pituitary, both of them secrete increased levels of TRH and TSH, which again acts on thyroid gland and produces more of T3 and T4, which again continues the cycle. So this is a negative feedback loop. Now the thyroid gland follows the negative feedback loop. So this TSH comes and acts on the thyroid gland, and this is how the hormone itself is synthesized. So actually, if you see the thyroid gland, this is what is there. There are circles of tissues which have these cells arranged, all right, and inside is a very jelly-like substance called the colloid. Inside all these islands of circles of cells, we have jelly-like substance called the colloid, and the cells here, okay, this entire structure is called a thyroid follicle, and each cell is a follicle cell. And there are cells outside of these follicles. They are called the parafollicular cells. These parafollicular cells are also the C cells, which secrete the calcitonin hormone. These follicular cells, they are the ones who produce a hormone called the thyroglobulin, and they are secreted into the colloid, and this colloid is filled with a lot of materials along with this thyroglobulin, and this thyroglobulin is split inside in the colloid, in that space, into these hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine. So the thyroxine is T4 and triiodothyronine is T3. This hormone is much more powerful than thyroxine, but only 10% of it is secreted. 90% of the thyroid hormone in our body is actually thyroxine, which is T4. So this is a little more detailed explanation of what actually happens. So if you see, if you see iodine, okay, thyroid gland requires iodine in the blood to function normally. That's why you see all this salt in India, especially near the Himalayan region. There's so much washout of iodine that people don't get enough iodine in their food, and because of this there is less iodine in their body, and because of this T3 T4 are not being able or not produced in their body sufficiently. So because of this they have a condition called hypothyroidism. What is hypothyroidism? Hypo is less, all right, so there is less amount of thyroid hormone in the body, and that's what hypothyroidism means. Why less amount of thyroid hormone in the body? Because there is not enough iron in the blood. That is why many of the salt companies started fortifying salt with iodine. Now what they do is they add iodine in very small amounts, few parts per million, into the salt, and because every household in a country uses salt, this naturally goes to all the houses, and as part of adding salt they also get iodine, and that supplements the deficiency of iodine and has actually improved hypothyroidism rates in the country. So this so again, so this is iodine coming from, this is the blood vessels, sorry, yeah, this is the blood vessel, and this is iodine from the blood which enters the cell. This is the thyroid gland, and this is the follicular cell, and iodine enters the follicular cell via a special transporter which transports iodine and sodium together. Now once iodine comes in, this iodine is transported and it goes into the colloid. All right. Now thyroglobulin is synthesized and discharged into the follicle lumen, and this is the thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin also gets outside and reaches the colloid space. These are the tyrosine molecules, and iodine attaches to these molecules and forms DIT, MIT and DIT. And this MIT and DIT, okay, I'm just using short forms here, they join together to form. So DIT has two iodine molecules, MIT has one iodine molecule, and these join together in different combination. DIT plus another DIT would totally give four molecules of iron, and that is what we call as T4. DIT plus MIT will give you 3 molecules of iron, and that is what we call as T3, triiodothyronine. So this is how, so this T3 and T4 is again taken back by the follicular cell, and this is how they are transported inside a cell. They are transported in vesicles, and this protect the substance from acting on other parts of the cell, and they go out and they release into the blood. And once they release into the blood, they go into all the different organs and start acting. Now, what are the organs that it acts on? Very interesting. Thyroid gland acts on virtually every organ in the body. It acts on the brain. It helps in the development of brain. It helps in myelinization of the brain. So what's myelinization? So in the brain has nerves, right? Nerves has the axon and has a cell body and the axon, and this is how an impulse action potential is transmitted. An impulse is transmitted in the brain. Now for electricity to travel, if you take a wire, if we just put copper straight there without any insulation, electricity cannot travel as fast as when you put an insulation. So when you put an insulation, a material that doesn't conduct electricity, what happens? Electricity is focused, it doesn't get dispersed on the way, and it can travel faster. The same thing happens in the nerve cells also. So these nerve cells have an insulation, and that insulation is called myelin. Okay, myelin sheath. Now this myelin sheath is very important in the body. There are many diseases which are caused just because this myelin sheath is lost, and these diseases are very painful. And thyroxine, the thyroid hormones, they help in the development of the brain, and they help in myelinization of the nerves. It also acts on the pituitary gland. It helps produce the TSH. It regulates the TSH hormone. We saw about the negative feedback loop. So if the thyroid hormone is actually less, TSH will be secreted more in amount. If the thyroid hormone is more, then TSH will be suppressed. Now the other thing that pituitary, the other thing that it does in the pituitary gland is stimulate the secretion of another hormone called the growth hormone. Now, this is a very important hormone, especially in growing children. This hormone is what causes the bones to grow, is what causes so many changes in the body, and gives and helps a person to grow. Then it also acts on the heart. It increases the cardiac output, it increases the heart rate, it increases the force of contraction of the heart. It also acts on the muscle. Uh, it increases energy expenditure, and that is what we call the basal metabolic rate. So all of us, when we are resting, when we are sleeping, when we are not using any of our muscles, okay, we still use a basal amount of energy to keep alive. This energy is the number of calories our body burns to carry out vital functions which are essential to life. So even when you're sleeping, you're breathing, right? So breathing is a very vital function. Even when you're sleeping, your heart is beating. So these are vital functions. Breathing, your heartbeat, and also all the enzymatic reactions inside your body, all of that, in the functions, the processes in the liver, the processes in the in the digestive system, processes in the bone, everything. So So this basal metabolic rate is the amount of calories is required to keep a person alive if you're not doing exercise, if you're not actively doing any work. Now, thyroid thyroid hormones, they directly increase this basal metabolic rate, and because they do that, because the number of calories consumed becomes higher, it produces heat. Remember this: more thyroid hormone produces more heat. We'll come back to the little later. Now, it also acts on the liver. It does a number of functions in the liver. It also acts on the adipose tissue. It causes the uh, fat cells to dissolve and disappear, and it does. It also helps in thermogenesis. That is nothing but a fancy term for making heat. Thyroid hormones help to make more heat. It also acts in the skeletal system, helps in the growth and maturation of the bones, and in adults it causes bone resorption. So bone is a very complex organ in itself. These bones, they are constantly formed and constantly destroyed, and that's what keeps the structure. And body has a number of processes kept in place to keep this uh, bone from being there, bone from getting all dissolved, and bone from becoming too strong. So thyroid hormone is one of the hormones that acts to resorb, for resorption of the bone, that is to destroy the bone there, to maintain homeostasis. So how does thyroid hormone actually act on the uh, cells? Is where, okay, this is again another picture for you. This is the blood vessel, and the thyroid hormone is traveling there, T3 and T4. And this hormone, because it's a lipid soluble hormone, it can pass through cell membranes. So usually there are different types of hormones in the body. There's some hormones which cannot cross the cell membrane because they are not lipid soluble. If they're not lipid soluble, then they need a special transporter, or usually this there is a receptor. Sorry, there's a receptor on the cell surface to which the hormone comes and binds, and that receptor, the other end of the receptor, which is inside the cell, from there something happens and starts a series of reactions to bring about the desired effect. But this hormone doesn't need to do that because it can cross through the cell membrane, and this hormone goes inside, and it goes and inside the nucleus. So this is the plasma membrane, and this is the nucleus. So because it's lipid soluble hormone, it goes straight into the nucleus, and it binds to the genes, and it causes configurational changes and exposes certain parts of the genes, which are then translated, which are then exposed. Certain part of the DNA is exposed, which is then uh, coded into a substance called the mRNA, which is the messenger RNA. This messenger RNA exits the nucleus, comes into the cytoplasm, where it gets binded to the ribosome, and this ribosome translates the code into a new protein. Okay, so this protein, the proteins are basically the structure and the functional unit of our body. Any new protein will later get released, and this will cause, either inside the cell or outside the cell, wherever it's supposed to act, these proteins act, and they cause the changes that are supposed to happen by the thyroid hormone. So this is basically at the molecular level of what actually happens when a thyroid hormone reaches the cell. So it goes inside, it binds to the DNA, it causes configurational changes, and it codes the messenger mRNA, which comes out into the plasma, into the cytoplasm, and there it gets translated into a protein which causes the effects that we want. Now, there's something that I wanted to know. Uh, so basically, these are the effects of the thyroid hormone. We're almost finishing now. Just a couple more things, and we'll be done. There are people. I'm sure you've heard of people. You've heard of dwarfs. You've heard of dwarfs. How many of you have heard of cretins? Sorry, cretins. Now, dwarfs are people. While they're growing, they didn't have sufficient amount of growth hormone. They didn't have this growth hormone. Now, growth hormone is secreted by the pituitary gland, and when that is not there, the body doesn't grow, the bones do not elongate. So the person stays as a short person throughout their life. And this is a very common condition. We most of you probably have seen a dwarf in life, or at least in TV, in any TV shows. But there are other people called cretins. Now, dwarfs are because of this hormone called the growth hormone. Cretins are because of this hormone called thyroxine. And I just want to highlight the importance of thyroxine. When growth hormone is not sufficient, the only thing that happens is the height. One of the main thing is that the height remains less, and the person remains short throughout life. But when thyroxine is less, the person not only becomes short statured, the person also is mentally retarded. That's a sad thing, because as we saw earlier, thyroxine is very important in helping the brain development, especially in children, those who are growing. If they don't have sufficient thyroxine, it can seriously hamper brain development, and it can cause mental retardation in children, in adults who are growing up. So those people are called cretins. Cretins are those who are dwarfs along with mental retardation, and that is because of thyroid less thyroid uh, hormone. Now, these are the two main conditions, which, I mean, this is a super simplified version of what can happen when the thyroid gland produces less of this hormone and the thyroid gland produces more of this hormone. That's called hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism. Now, when we talk about hypothyroidism, what is the pathology here is T3, T3 and T4 are less in the body. Okay, when T3 and T4 are less, we know that it causes a negative feedback on the pituitary. It tells the pituitary that T3 and T4 are less, we need more of it. So the pituitary thinks we need to secrete more TSH. Alright, so the TSH levels are increased. So in a hypothyroid patient, if we do what we usually do is a TSH lab sample, and that is usually increased. T3, T4 are decreased, TSH is increased. Meanwhile, in hyperthyroidism, TSH is decreased. Why? Because T3 and T4 are more in the body, and so pituitary thinks is secreting so much TSH that T3 and T4 are very high, and so it stops secreting TSH. TSH levels become low in an attempt to prevent further production of T3 and T4. Now, in hypothyroidism, these are the symptoms that you see, and it's good to be aware of the symptoms. So if you see yourselves getting this, or any in your family or someone, a friend, you may advise them to go to a medical practitioner to get their blood test done, to get them examined, and see if they need to be started, if they have any issue and need to be started on treatment. Because both of these conditions got decent treatment, good treatment actually, if you take the treatment on time regularly, and you can actually control the disease fairly well. Now, hypothyroidism, what all it can cause, it causes intolerance to cold. So I told you, thyroid hormone thyroxine acts on the body and increases the basal metabolic rate, which can produce heat. Now, when thyroid hormone is very less in the body is not able to produce sufficient heat already, and on top of that, if you expose the body to cold, the person is just unable to bear any cold. There is receding hairline, there is a lot of hair fall, there is facial edema, and then person has a very dull blank expression. There is extreme fatigue, because uh, the muscles are not acting as they should. Then there is a thick tongue, which is causing slow speech. And the patient doesn't feel like eating. That's called anorexia. They have brittle nails and hair. And okay, so these are the basically saying the same thing. They have muscle pain, muscle ache, and Another thing is they have constipation because the GI tract is not working normally. It's not working at the rate that it should. What are the things that you can see is if you go to doctor will check your temperature and your temperature may be less than normal. You may have a low heart rate. You may have weight gain. So hypothyroid patients, they don't eat well. They have anorexia. They have loss of appetite. Sorry, they have loss of appetite, but then that but still they get weight gain. They get more, they have more weight. So you see, some people may say, I don't eat anything, I eat very less, I don't feel like eating, I feel very tired, but still I'm gaining more weight. So probably then you may have to think about thyroid dysfunction. Patients will also have a thick skin and can have cardiac complications. On the other hand, when the patient has hyperthyroidism, just opposite to that, patient is intolerant to heat, cannot tolerate heat. Patient has a fine straight hair, bulging eyes. You can very typically see this. The eyes will almost be coming out of the socket. You can see usually uh, the eyes are bulging. If you see a patient with hyperthyroidism with bulging eyes, then you will never forget that picture. And patient also have a facial flushing. They will have, some of them can have enlarged thyroid gland, and their heart will be beating faster. Blood pressure may be higher. Breast can become larger in size. The patient can have weight loss because a lot of calories are being used on a regular basis because of BMR is elevated. Patient can have muscle wasting, and patient here will have diarrhea. Over there patient has constipation, over here patient has diarrhea, and both of this can cause menstrual changes in women. It can cause hypothyroidism, causes amenorrhea, and that is, the patient doesn't bleed, doesn't have periods, and hypothyroidism causes heavy bleeding. And patient will classically have tremors. They will their hands will shiver. Okay, so that is seen in hyperthyroidism. Yeah, so yeah, that's it. I think this brings us almost to the end of the presentation. I just have a couple more points to share before I finish it. So first thing I wanted to show you is goiter. So this is a very classical example of goiter. You can see there's a large thyroid swelling. This is the location of the thyroid, and there's a swelling over there. And if you go to rural areas, especially in areas where iodine deficiency is present, like near the Himalayan regions, you can see this very commonly. And now because of the supplementation fortification of iodine, this problem has come down, but this is commonly seen. And why is this produced? The mechanism is very interesting. I just wanted to show you that. So this is basically what I've already explained, the negative feedback loop. Now what happens in the negative feedback loop is, okay, so this is the hypothalamus, this is the anterior pituitary. Hypothalamus secretes the thyrotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the anterior pituitary and secretes the thyroid stimulating hormone, which acts on the thyroid gland, and that produces T3 and T4. We all know this now. Now what happens is the negative feedback, right? What does T3 and T4 do? It acts on the anterior pituitary, it acts on the hypothalamus, and it acts negatively. So it tells them to secrete less of TRH and less of TSH. Now what happens in a patient with iodine deficiency? All right, in a patient with iodine deficiency, say you're living in the Himalayas, and you don't have enough iodine in your body. The thyroid gland is not able to, so TSH is normal initially, and this TSH is acting on the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is not able to produce the T3 and T4 because we know that to make this hormone the body needs iodine, but there is no iodine, so the body is not able to make T3 and T4. When T3 and T4 are not made, these values become very less, right? T3 and T4 values become less. Now when this value become less, there is a negative feedback. it goes to the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus, and it tells the body that there is not enough T3 and T4, right? There's not enough T3 and T4. Now this makes the pituitary gland secrete more TSH. TSH will increase. Now this is what normally happens in hypothyroidism. Patient is currently in hypothyroidism because T3 and T4 are less, and as a result TSH increases. Now TSH increases, but what happens? It acts on the thyroid. Usually, if the patient is not iron deficient, the thyroid gland starts acting more, and it starts producing sufficient amount of T3 and T4 in response to the increased amount of TSH. But now here, because there is no iodine to start with, the more, even though the TSH produced is more, thyroid is still unable to produce T3 and T4, which again acts back and says, no, we need even more TSH because we are not able to produce T3, T4. So the body pituitary produces even more TSH, but still the body is not able to produce T3, T4, and so there is again another feedback, negative feedback, and it produces more and more and more. This what it does is, all this hormone TSH, it acts on the thyroid gland, right? And thyroid gland normally is this size, but because normally is this size, but because because of increased TSH, the size of the thyroid gland becomes more, because it's constantly trying to work more, and this is what we call hypertrophy of the thyroid gland, and that's what causes this goiter. That's what causes the size increase, because the TSH keeps acting on the thyroid gland even if it's not able to produce anymore, to screen for hypothyroidism in babies. So a couple of lessons we can learn from hypothyroidism. So one is, do not judge a book by a cover. So this is a personal lesson which I learned. There was a friend of mine in a place that I worked, and he used to be very fat, uh, so fat that he used to find it difficult to walk also. And many people around him, they make fun of him. I mean, this happens normally, right? And a lot of people uh, put him down and judge him for that. They say that he's eating so much, and because of that he's become very fat. But actually, sadly, this friend had hypothyroidism, because of which he was putting on weight. So even though he was not eating much food, even though uh, he's not overeater, he still was fat, and that is because of his body condition. And we see this again so many places. Many times when we look at people, we tend to judge them, we tend to critique them, and draw conclusions. Many times it's better not to do them unless it is absolutely necessary, unless you know all the circumstances that is causing that patient uh, the condition. So do not judge a book by cover. Some people uh, maybe such because of their condition, which they didn't do anything to get. They didn't do a sin, or they didn't commit something wrong to get that. It might have been just from their parents' genetics. The second thing that I learned personally is the feedback loops, and it's very interesting. In our lives, we have so many feedback systems in place, and we need to make use of these feedback systems. Uh, when when people say something, when there's negative feedback or positive feedback, we can use both of that uh, constructively and improve our lives. That's what our body does all the time. It has both positive and negative feedback, and it knows way to use the positive feedback and way to use the negative feedback. But these feedback loops can go wrong, can go haywire, and it can cause inflammation, and as we saw, it can also cause the thyroid gland to become large in size and cause a goiter, and that is because of impaired feedback loop, right? I mean, the loop is just functioning irrespective of whether the function is happening or not. And so we need to use these feedback loops to our advantages in our lives. We Many of our actions, we know that every action produces a reaction and produces consequences. when we get consequences, it's time for us to learn from them. And if there are negative consequences, we learn and change our actions, and there are positive consequences, we learn and increase those actions. So it is important to remember this, and appropriately have the right response to feedbacks. There's another thing that I really liked is about see this cord blood test for TSH is done for all the patients, all the babies, and only 3 in 10,000 is positive, but still they do it for all babies, and that taught me that uh, the need for thoroughness when something is very important, when it's so important not to miss hypothyroidism in a child, in a baby. uh, it warrants spending so much money, wasting so much money testing, doing the test for everyone, just to pick out those three out of those 10,000 and give a good life to those three babies out of 10,000. And so, being thorough in life can take us to places, can give us, can teach us many things, and it's important that we be thorough in our lives. Thank you, all of you. Thank you. Hope you learned something about thyroid gland, and hope we can continue learning more. You can go back and search more on this gland, and it's amazing, and it's exciting to see how God has designed this, and how such a small gland in the body affects so many organs, and in ways that are amazing.